It's really nice to have you here today, and I'd like to ask you some questions about Emmanuel House and just your life in general and how you got here, really. So, as the CEO of Emmanuel House, it would be very interesting to know what kinds of things that you do.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So a little bit about Emmanuel House. Emmanuel House has been a service in Nottingham for 46 years, and it's an organisation that provides services for people who are homeless and people who are at risk of homelessness. We provide kind of three types of services. One is a sort of drop-in access service where people come and get sort of very basic needs like food and clothing. But also then there's advice and information people need to get out of, to get out of homelessness. Then we have a whole range of different outreach services, working directly with people who are rough sleeping on the street or somewhere else, people who are in what's called supported provision, maybe particularly focusing on mental health, those kind of things. And then we provide some respite accommodation. So every year we provide an emergency winter shelter, and that runs from sort of October till April. And then we also are running a project at the moment for women who've got very complex needs, who are homeless and have suffered domestic violence and domestic abuse. But the Sleep Out that you mentioned is an event that takes place every year, and it's primarily for people who run companies. So we try and get people, other CEOs and senior managers and teams of people from businesses to get involved in the Sleep Out, basically to raise money for homelessness and another couple of charities as well. And yeah, it's not, you can't call it like being homeless, but it does give a flavour of having to sleep out at night. And we usually have it at the Notts County football ground, Nottinghamshire County football ground, and so you do wake up freezing cold in the morning. And I remember after one event there were a group of guys from a business, and they were sitting around having breakfast, and one of them said, actually after one night, he says, it wasn't too bad, but after 3 nights that would do my head in. And that really sort of gives an indication of the sort of insight that somebody might have if they had to sort of rough sleep. So that's what the event is about.
That's really incredible that you've actually done that yourself and really tried to feel what it's like to be homeless.
Well, I think it's, as I say, it's one night, because there's more to homelessness than sleeping out. So, for example, if you're rough sleeping and you are genuinely homeless, what are you going to do the next day? We woke up this morning. We had a shape to our day. We knew where we were going to go. We knew, we didn't ask ourselves whether we were going to eat today. We didn't ask ourselves whether anybody was going to call us by our name today. We had a place to go. There were people to interact with. And one of the consequences of homelessness is you become invisible. So you become invisible to other individual people, but you also become invisible to other services. So one of the things that Emmanuel House does is in working with people is helping people to recover their self-esteem and their dignity, their human dignity. That's very important. The other thing is, homelessness can happen to anybody, and in recent years, people who use Emmanuel House are better dressed and better spoken. It's something that really impacts on people, and we know now that there's a lot of anxiety around people and their mortgages, and I mean, Nottingham is the most expensive place to rent in the country. And also, there's not many places to rent, especially if you're in lower paid employment. So, I think people get it, and people understand that homelessness is a really a blight on our community that shouldn't be tolerated.
Yeah. So we know that Emmanuel House has done so much to help people who are already homeless, but is there anything that you can think of that Emmanuel House has done or should be doing to prevent it in the first place?
Well, that's a really good question, and the aim of all the services now is to try and provide support much more upstream. I think it was Desmond Tutu who said, we spend our time pulling people out of the stream, but we need to go more upstream to find out who's pushing them in. And homelessness is an organic system. It's not just something that's haphazard. It has a beginning and a middle and an end. And so, for example, one of the most common reasons why somebody becomes homeless is relationship breakdown. And at this very time, one of the things that's happening is we're finding more people sleeping in their cars. So that kind of gives you an idea about the sort of the circumstances that people, first of all, live with and then have to leave. So in terms of the prevention stuff, we want to get support in at the earliest possible stage. So if somebody's at risk of becoming homeless, then that's where we want to get the support in place. And that's where all the services in Nottingham, that's where they're trying to aim their support. So that where somebody maybe is in rented accommodation, and the landlord says, I'm going to, it's what's called a Section 21, so they can evict somebody at 8 weeks' notice with no cause at all. So in those circumstances, we would want to get support in to help that person find alternative accommodation as quickly as possible. But also, if there was a sort of an argument with the landlord, we'd want to get in there and sort of mediate between the tenant and the landlord to prevent, it escalating and sort of becoming someone being evicted. Because obviously prevention is better than cure. And actually it's better for the landlord as well, because every time the landlord evicts somebody, they lose money, so they have to run a business. So if we can keep the landlord and tenant together, then that's better for everybody all around.
Yes. Are there have any particular goals with regards to housing or provisions for people, and any methods on how to get there?
Right. So one of the things that Emmanuel House wants to do is to develop its winter shelter provision based on our experience of COVID. So we're now looking to put in planning permission actually this week to convert 2 of our floors into 20 rooms, ensuite rooms for emergency respite accommodation. And that's very important in the whole system, because when someone becomes homeless, what they need is to be able to access very, very quickly good quality accommodation with the support provided to help them then move on into more secure accommodation, help them get back on their feet. I mean, one of the things to note is that some people who are homeless are actually working. They're employed. It's just that they don't have enough money to pay the deposit and the rent, to go into the place where they, to call home. So we want to provide these 20 rooms of accommodation, and rather than it just being a few months of the year, it'll be 24/7. We'll also be able to provide some of the accommodation for particular groups, so for example maybe women or people who've got COVID. So that will be an important development in the whole system of provision in Nottingham. We just need a couple of £1 million to be able to do that. We need to raise that then over the next 18 months or so to make that become possible.
Are there any particular things that the public of Nottingham can do to help homeless people?
Well, I think, this leads into the whole issue about, the question that everybody asks is, should I give money to people on the street, that kind of stuff. And the answer I give is, well, it's always a personal choice whether you do that. But then I would say, you know, I don't know anybody who works in homelessness services who gives money to people on the street. And the dilemma is, you know, we're always faced with a story, you know, I need money for a hostel. Well, you never need money for a hostel. Or I need money to buy a meal at Emmanuel House. You never need money to buy a meal at Emmanuel House. You got two people, and one says, you know, I want to buy food, and the other person says, I want to buy food, and you know, you give them the money, and you say, well, you know, how do you know that that's what they're going to do with the money? So the safer, I would say, the safer bet really is for people, if they want to donate money, is to give to any of the charities that are around in Nottingham. I mean, Emmanuel House is one of those charities. But also volunteering is very important, and you know, every homelessness service, where there is a success, there is also a successful relationship. So many people who are homeless are very mistrustful. They've had bad experiences of services. So building relationships of trust is absolutely key and central to helping somebody out of homelessness. And very often volunteers can build the kind of relationships that's not possible, certainly in initial stages, with people who are paid. Because in a sense, as a professional, there is a sort of a barrier there, isn't it? It's your job to do this. But if you're a volunteer, you're not getting paid for it. You're there with your free time. The conversations can be about where we went on holiday, or do you like chess, or what are your dreams and ambitions for the future? It can be anything. And so, you know, volunteers can provide a very, very important first step to helping bridge the organisation with the individual person. And then, of course, there are other things people can donate, like food and clothing and things like that. So there are all sorts of ways. And one of the things that Emmanuel House is good at is providing opportunities for people to get involved in doing something for homelessness. And you know, I've often said to volunteers in Emmanuel House, when they've got their hands in the sink washing the dishes, I say to them, well, what do you tell your friends you do when you volunteer? And say, well, I tell my friends that I help wash dishes and serve food. I said, that is the wrong answer. The wrong answer is that you're contributing to helping someone out of homelessness. So whatever role you're involved, that's what it all kind of points to. And that's very important, because no one organisation, no one service, not even just the city council, can solve homelessness on their own. It has to be a community, response, and everyone's got a role to play. And you know, we have 7-year-olds who, you know, raise money, and you know, they go on cycle rides, and you know, who are very passionate because they see somebody on the street. Of course, young children, they just see things in terms of right and wrong. So you know, never too old and never too young to be able to get involved in sort of addressing the issue of homelessness.
It's really beautiful that the community can get involved in something like that. Have you ever had any particularly meaningful interactions with people that you've helped?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, you know, I think of one person who used to live abroad, and you know, they got involved they were involved in a relationship, and the relationship went wrong, and then they got involved in drugs and stuff, and then they came back to Nottingham, and you know, we provided support for them, and you know, they got into accommodation, and they then started going to university. You know, they had a baby, and put that lived experience into systems, so the systems are shaped in a way that are most relevant to the needs of the people who need the support and the help. And of course, what we forget is, and all too easy, is that all of us, every single living human being at some time in our lives, need help and support. It's just that people who've got money pay for it, you know, and they're not really seen. People who don't have money need to rely on the public services, and that's why it's very important that we have good, robust and well-resourced public services.
Do you feel that people view homeless people as, well, people?
Well, yes, they are. Of course,
Humans.
yeah, of course, they're people, and you know, it's very easy when I go into schools. I get one of the things I ask the children to do is to draw a homeless person, and of course, most of them draw a scruffy, middle-aged, bearded, ill-shaven man, often with a bottle beside them. But you know, homelessness is homelessness. It's not about drinking or anything else. And on our website, we've got a film called Lone, which is a story about a young woman called Gemma, and she's just an ordinary young woman. Maybe we've done that in the past. And obviously, we brand our building in particular colours and try and make it explicit about what we do. So we do a lot, and actually, as part of our advertising and our publicising, what we try and do is to create relationships with people who are interested in connecting, and we try and make those relationships as close and as intimate as possible. So we've got some open days coming up. Everybody will be invited to the open days, anybody who's on our mailing lists, plus they'll be publicised.
Thank you. This has been really interesting. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you for having me.